I'll use the words lightly. I don't want to rush through something like this, obviously, since it's very important. But I do want to be mindful of the time that we have to get ready for our 6 o'clock meeting. So I know we have a lot to discuss with our 1 cent. So I'm going to turn it over to Carter, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about the process, and then we can kind of move from there. So Carter, I'm going to go ahead and turn that to you.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, good evening. Pursuant to our last conversation, which would have been a week ago, council asked for some indication from the staff's perspective with regard to, in my opinion, a lot of the feedback that had been given and talked about and bantered about and so forth, and how it could reflect into an allocation for the various groups and entities that are out there. So with regard to that, it certainly seemed to me that a big priority for the council was funding agencies that gave direct aid to the poor. And so as you can see here, those agencies that give direct aid to the poor did rise to the top, as it were, in much of what they requested. Furthermore, there were other items as well that went into this conversation. Definitely where the city attorney had concerns, we tried to reflect those in the recommendations as well. With regard to entities that are outside the city, we saw those kind of fall to the other end of the spectrum. You had a couple recommendations in here, or excuse me, not recommendations, proposals from agencies that are actually government agencies. And so I don't know where you fall with that or where you sit with that, but with regard to a place like the National Historic Trail Center that's funded largely by federal dollars, it seemed inconsistent to me to use City of Casper tax-generated dollars, if you will. So there's a couple of recommendations in that regard also. We had talked in the past in other funding programs where expanding the program might not be appealing to you either. And so those that were new requests and that sort of thing, we saw those fall to the bottom as well in terms of funding priority. And so with that, ladies and gentlemen of the council, again, you have a recommendation from staff. It's certainly not meant to be a directive. It's certainly not meant to be something that seals the deal, as it were, with regard to the conversation that we need to have this evening. But I do want to say that I'm hopeful that we can bring a resolution to you for formal consideration in the first meeting in October that would give you the opportunity to pass sort of a formal directive pertaining to 1 cent overall, of which the social service agencies or the community projects, or however you want to term it, would be a big part, obviously. Whether you go 6 million, whether you go 3 million, or some number thereabouts. The other side of this, though, is with regard to the projects that you view as a higher priority as well. We've given you a list of projects both on sort of a first priority basis from staff's perspective. We've also given you a list of projects from staff's perspective on a secondary tier, if you will, of priority. And at this point, we just would like to know what direction you'd like to go in from here. And so that's kind of where we're at, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, I have a comment.
Yeah, Dallas.
I asked you to do this. You did it, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
It was very helpful.
Good.
And I didn't respond to it because I've struggled with it, but I decided that I think that you and the staff know more about this, the finer details of the development of this. So I'm going to accept this myself. Now, with a couple caveats. One is that I really do think that and I texted you this, and you remember the text. I sent you a text, and I said, I wanted to see the rescue mission get money, and I wanted to see the CATSI get the money that we cut from them that will affect people getting free rides. And somehow, God has put in front of me watching these CATSI buses pick people up over here at the Catholic home on Alcott Street, and watching the driver get out and help those elderly people that are in wheelchairs get in there. And quite frankly, I can't stand the thought that they may not be able to pay to get on that. So those are two things, and I don't know what the council is going to do. If the council decides to give money to some, more money to one of these nonprofits that actually help people in Casper, and they need a vote to pass it, I'm going to vote for them to change that. But you know, this is a big issue, but I think you're the one who knows the most. You know that. And my heart is in it more than the financial aspects present themselves, because I would have liked to have seen because I sent Fleur a memo last week saying I want to give money, put me down for giving every request that the nonprofits made, the whole $13 million, and I meant that. I knew that would get voted down and would go nowhere. And I'm not really trying to make a statement about that, but I am trying to support you in keeping the city financially alive, balanced, and well. But I still think we can afford to give $25,000 to a couple of police officers. And I think we can give the rescue mission for the work that they do, because that breaks my heart that we don't want to give them any money. And the CATSI, and helping the people that ride the CATSI bus that no one else can help but some governmental agency, and we're the ones. So that's how I feel.
So if we look at it right now, we've got 3.2 million. If we look at the averages, the way it looks right now. And so I don't know where you guys want to go, how you guys want to move forward with what we're looking at, if there's ones that people want to advocate a little bit more for what they're looking at, or how people are feeling comfortable with that. Bob?
I guess, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess based on some of the procedures that we've been through before, I would accept the averages that we've got with everybody in there. I think that fits pretty good. And I know I was a little more generous to some of the construction projects, but I did that for a reason. First of all, I think in the case of the library had gotten quite a bit more from us up until this last 1 cent. We paid for almost all of their books, and the fact remains that about 80% of their customers are within the city. And I did give more money to the Lyric, and a lot of people know the history of the Lyric. They started out looking for $5 million years ago and tried several times and couldn't get there. However, that group has built the group up, and they've made a commitment to that building. And they do have an income now. They are routinely renting that place. And I look for this as a little piece to help them, so I gave them quite a bit more money. And they had also committed, as I recall in their documentation, that this was a conditional match. They didn't raise it, we didn't give it. And so that's kind of a drawback for us. And I think we had a similar situation with the science zone. So the Lyric and the science zone were kind of similar in that they said they didn't match it, they wouldn't get it. So I looked at the YMCA as kind of a similar thing, and I know that property competes to some degree with what we have when we built the rec center. However, the Y was here first, and they've had a 10-year project to try and get that Y rebuilt. So I'm just being a little more generous there, and that's the reason I did it. But I'd still go with the averages.
Sean and then Mike.
Are you gonna turn yours? Okay, I kinda wanna wait and see what hers does to the averages.
Okay.
And then, I made sure that the needy and children were funded first before I went anywhere else in the way that I did mine.
Okay. Hold on one second, I got Mike and then Chris, and then Kenny, did you wanna say something? Okay, go ahead, Mike.
The only problem that I have with going with the averages is that, for instance, the downtown development, as an example, they had a specific item that they wanted, a snowplow or something that they said would cost $23,000. I don't know if giving them what amounts to about half of that price, if that even, you know, if that makes sense, because I can understand, you know, paring someone's request down, but if you pare it down to the point where, well, you can't do what you wanna do, then to me that seems kind of a little bit meaningless. Like, and that one, for instance, I think should either
Well,
be
give them $1
zero
million,
or-
you'll raise their average and they'll get their money. Well, that's how silly that is.
Well, yeah.
Because if you wanted to do that, you could manipulate every one of these things.
Well, I know, yeah.
Especially now, Kenny and I could totally manipulate these numbers if we wanted to make an average in there.
Well, yeah, and so I don't think we can just blindly follow the averages.
Okay.
But, because there were some of them that I had zeroed that I could potentially have, you know, gone up someone and things, but, cause I did kinda wanna hear what everybody else thought. But anyway, though, I just wanted to offer that thought.
Thanks. Chris?
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to wait and see what the averages change to when we get Canines, and we'll probably get that email prior to a meeting, right? I did, similar to what Sean did, I didn't do that exclusively, but I would just ask you to look at, when we see CASA Children's Advocacy Project, YCC, those are funded well, not at the request level that they had. I think those are very critical areas. The Iris House I know is new. I know it's a new concept. It's not a new idea. There was a time several years ago that I was on the board for NAMI, and the idea, so what we see and what we hear and what our police force deals with every day, and we talk about the homeless problem, we don't talk about the related addictions and mental health issues that go along with that. And it does not cure itself unless there's a mechanism in there where we can help on that. And as a police officer, you see the same people and you watch the spiral. And it typically goes a stable period, and Charlie will know the actual terms, but you go through a stable period, then this degradation, and it's usually fueled by alcohol or drugs, whatever self-medication that is gonna work for them, and then institutionalized for a while, balanced out on meds, brought back out. And my impression of this Iris House was that this actually goes towards trying to break that chain, teaching people to properly self-medicate, do for themselves, and not be stuck in this circle. A lot of the homeless condition, and we have the experts here, is fueled by those addictions and by some mental health issues that cannot be overcome just by putting money at a facility alone. I don't know if this will work. They wanted $20,000, or they wanted more. They wanted $100,000. I think that's a shot worth taking. If it doesn't work, we don't fund it again. Stats would pay out, and it would make our community better. Or Chris Walsh threw away $100,000 on a wild idea, but I'm willing to do that. I would like y'all to
So
consider that.
you're advocating for Iris House?
Everything that I've mentioned on here so far, yes, I am, but I know Iris House isn't on the high popularity list for, I mean, that one breaks down on $17,000. I don't think they'll be able to put the programs together or even function.
Can I,
And
Mr.
so we
Mayor,
set them up
respond
for,
to this?
we set them up for failure. I believe in the concept. People will have to prove it. And if they don't, I'm not willing to help them out again. I wish there was a way aside from paying for the building at the Lyric to help them out, because I've spoken with some of the people at the Lyric. They've got grand, fantastic ideas. They have a lot of outside matching money and donations. But is anybody surprised about how I feel about buying more buildings? Meals on Wheels, I mean, funding's almost what they requested there. I would like to see them fully funded. Seton House, again, provides a very great service for a unique and definite need in our community. And I agree with the judge that, let's buy a whole tractor with $23,000 to plow the sidewalks downtown. Hospice, I think, should get everything. Central Wyoming Senior Services, shame on you guys. Funded uncompleted. The Health Department. Who isn't frustrated about the lack of presentation and the short and the late application from the Health Department, but they're also a critical part of the community. I voted on mine to spend enough to buy the vehicles that they're requesting, so there's my spiel on things.
Did you want to respond to something else?
Yeah, a couple things. I agree usually with most of what Councilman Wall says. The one thing about the Iris House, though, I don't think you were at the last meeting,
I wasn't.
because I asked him about that. But all the people that come in there are referred by doctors and they have insurance. They're not getting people who don't have money. So they kind of lost me when I found that out.
Oh, I figured this would be something along
It's
with
not
the
even what you
NAMI
thought.
type
I don't
housing.
think. It's all people who come in and they get referred over there, and they have to be referred over there, and it's usually by some doctor. I don't want to say. That's generally what I remember, and I know other councilmen heard a similar thing. And I said, are you taking homeless people or people with very little money? And right now they're not. So that's one of the areas, because I was trying to pay attention to our constitutional requirements and our statutory requirements. Quite frankly, a snowblower being asked for by the Downtown Development Association didn't do much for me, because that money could go to let old people ride a bus. And we already have snow removal equipment that we can send over there and take care of Kevin Hawley's problem any moment he wants it done. So that didn't register with me, and even he said that after he heard all those presentations, he could understand why he may not get the money. And I can understand why he doesn't get the money. The Lyric, it's a wonderful place. I'd love to see Casper have that. I'd love to see all that done. I don't know how legally we can buy a building,
Yeah, I don't
because that one statute says we have to have a mortgage on the money. That'd be up to Mr. Hanley to answer that question. But last week, when I sent Fleur, I sent in my list saying, I want to give these people every dime they ask for. Now, I'm glad that didn't get put in here and get averaged in, because it would have changed the averages. Because that wasn't my intent for doing that, although I figured that that's what would ultimately happen, was everybody'd get averaged, and then somebody'd say, let's do an average job and take these averages, which I'm not for doing that at all, because it's too easily manipulated at this point. So if the manager and his people think this is fair, I'm gonna go with it, except for a couple things, and I've already mentioned them. And I really think we have to look at those two items of making sure those people have a ride and making sure that the home runs.
Can I follow up real quick?
Yeah, you bet.
I do agree that the city management does have a lot of insight on these things that we may not. But to say that, to, basically disavow any responsibility for making the call on that, I don't think that's fair to them, because it's easy for me to say, yeah, boy, that was a bad call, but the city manager did it. So I'm willing to say, yeah, I like the Lyric and I want to see something happen. I didn't allocate any money to it because I feel the same way as you do. So I'll live with that. I'll say it out loud and I'll live with it.
And I think they should get all the money they ask for. That's how I feel about it, truthfully. I think all of those entities should be. I think we should also have something, let's say they're thinking there's gonna be 55 million. What if 70 million comes in because we have a spike? What happens to the other 15 million? I'd like to see this council at least have a idea that if this 15 million comes in, that can go into funding of these people that didn't get anything. But now you're
That's a good idea.
binding another council. I think all you could do is recommend, we thought this at the time, we thought it was a great idea because these were needy individuals, and we would like to have seen them funded. I'd like to see them all funded. But, if you ask a manager to balance budgets and watch the money, and this is what he and his people come up with, you know, pay him a lot of money, pay those people a lot of money, they're experts. So I don't feel like I'm dodging the bullet, I feel like I'm taking the experts' advice, and I'm not gonna badmouth him if something happens that, if Katrina hits and he didn't know it. But they know more than we do. And so I like to go do my own investigation. I think that these helping the citizens of our town that can't help themselves should be a major deal for us. Some people agree, some people don't.
Kenny?
I'm sorry I missed last week and part of this conversation. So what I hear though is that there's a debate about averages, and what I'm thinking is if one of the agencies didn't get 5 members to support it, it should just automatically drop off the list and they wouldn't get anything. So I think that's one of the ways we've done a lot of the funding through community promotions in the past, and that might just simplify the whole task, because if they don't have 5 votes, they're off the list completely. Because you're right, I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna screw up the average for my favorite projects.
Do you recommend we have a vote on each of those then and cut the list?
So if there's 5 zeros on an agency, they should just, they're out.
If
That's kinda
we
how I
did that,
feel.
Joshua's Storehouse would get nothing.
We still have her vote though.
Yeah, well, I'm just going off of this list here.
Well, Mike, if you really wanna see the numbers,
I-
have them average what I said in, like they did yours, which was every bit, and
Yeah.
then see how those averages would change.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying that if, I was just looking at this to see what the impact of this list would be if we followed your thing, that if there are 5 zeros, then they go off the list. I wasn't editorializing on it, I was just saying that looking down here so far, Joshua's is the only one that I think we would lose there.
And they help a lot of people.
The historic trails, we'd lose them.
Yeah, there's
But
quite a few that would drop
I
off.
think they should be lost there.
It's time to go down.
Yep.
So, ladies and gentlemen, then let's do this really quick since Kenny brought this up. Is there support for the 5 votes to do it that way? Chris? Huber?
My only hesitation
Think it
is
passes
that I
anyway.
was ready to listen to people's suggestions on some of them that I had zeroed,
He's the
but
tiebreaker.
in
You're the
general,
tiebreaker.
yeah.
Some of us haven't had a chance to talk here either.
Yeah.
You want to keep going? So you want to say
He
something?
wants to say something,
Go
you
ahead,
might
Charlie.
change your mind.
That's true.
Well, I mean, that was the discussion
Well,
we wanted
exactly,
to have, is the
exactly.
priorities.
Mhm.
But I guess the first thing I wanna say is I think with all the tension that's focused on this, there's a risk that we mischaracterize the entire 1 cent process, because we're anticipating, hoping, A, that it'll pass, and B, that it will get about $58 million over the next 4 years. The total amount of this money, if you look at the averages, is a little over $3 million. And so, the core of the 1 cent process is not this. It is, in fact, streets, law enforcement, fire, water, sewer, and a little bit for parks. That's what the 1 cent is about. This entire process tends to get a lot of attention for a relatively small percentage of the total that we hope that we will collect. So I tried to be conservative with mine because staff did go to all the effort to come up with these 2nd-tier projects as Councilman Morgan requested. And some of these are very valuable projects that, that are really our core responsibility. And so I'm hopeful that maybe we can, if we do get underneath these totals, or below these totals that we were that was our maximum, that maybe we could apply some of that towards some of these 2nd-tier projects. In my voting, I tended to focus more on capital, sort of in a middle ground on consumables, food, things that we were going to give to people, to and supplies, and then salary was sort of my last priority. And so when I saw salary and capital, I would tend to reduce that by what I thought the salary component might be roughly, or maybe weight that 20%. Because when we fund salaries, basically people are hiring positions based on those decisions, and if the 1 cent isn't passed the next time around, those positions all have to go away. Okay, the capital construction, however, is a long-term improvement for the community. So I tended to vote more for those projects. I think the averaging is the fairest way to do it, and the reason I do is that we do have a discrepancy. Each of us is a duly elected representative, and that gives each of us 1/9 of the influence in terms of what each program or agency gets. And so, to eliminate somebody when one council member might think that that's the first of their priorities, I think is unfair, and I just think we should stick with the averages. And as far as things like the DDA, one of the beauties of this whole process is that these are nonprofit organizations. They have the capability to raise money through donations that we can't do. And so they can make up those differences, or find out some way to get used equipment, or whatever they need to do. And so if we come up short in terms of their request, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not helpful to them, because it basically makes them scramble to make up those differences, and they have those capabilities. As far as specific projects, I think what happened with the Iris House is that was a pilot project, and that they specifically went to physicians so that they could have some data collection on those individuals. But their long-term goal would be to serve the very people that you're concerned about once the drop-in facility is staffed. But even in their case, if they were to get the average, now they gotta go to work and figure out a way to either staff it with less help, or get some donations to make up the difference. So I don't think that's always inappropriate. In terms of specifics, I wrestle with things like the Sports Alliance. I don't know how many people they're gonna bring to Casper through their events. But if they're successful at that, that's sales tax revenue that then we have in our coffers to do things like fund poverty resistance and some of the other nonprofits that we're concerned about. So it seems like, how could you vote for some referees over poverty resistance? Well, it's that larger picture that I think we have to look at. So I voted to give them some portion of their request. I also just want to speak on behalf of the Lyric as well. It's difficult, but and I didn't get the sense that we're buying the building. I get the sense that we're paying off the mortgage for them, and they will own the building.
That's what's gonna happen.
That's your
Okay.
Well, there's a difference. They hold the title, and we don't.
Yeah,
So,
but the law might be that we have to have a mortgage on it.
so in any case, I would guess the building of that facility is going to be north of $20 million. And the vast majority of those facilities are 100% owned by the municipality. That's how it is in Billings and surrounding areas. They're built by the city and owned by the city. We are fortunate to have a group that's willing to step up and do this, and they're asking us for what amounts to 3 or 4% of the total cost of that project.
So we make them a 98%.
So I'd like to ask Mr. Henley what he
On
thinks
their
of
investment.
so let's give the money.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
So is that, well, what I'm saying is, if you're saying the building's worth $20 million, we pay off their mortgage for them, and now they just get to pocket all that? I mean,
No, that isn't that.
No, they've got to raise the rest of the money to make it remodel.
right.
And that's their
But
project.
their mortgage is only $700,000.
Right,
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. For a relatively small contribution on our part, we kickstart that project, and a bunch of money gets spent in Casper, and a lot of construction workers are feeding their families, and other things are happening in this community, which is the same for Stevens project. But, so I don't think it's about giving money to a civic auditorium. I think it would also be a real economic stimulus for us. So I don't know, this is just a very, very, very tough process, but I tried to keep mine under and put some pressure on some of these folks to make up the differences, and try not to overweight salaries so that we create this exposure that these whole programs just disappear if we stop funding them. But I also think we need to pay attention to these second-tier projects if there's some money left over.
Mr. Mayor, would you ask the city attorney if this is something that we can do?
The lyric. John, is this, can we,
You know, I've looked at that, and it's certainly not a human services program, which a lot of these would be. I don't see that it serves the poor. I don't see right now, not even being operational, that would really make a good argument that it's an advertisement for this. You know, sometimes they'll try to back into things that way. But since it's not even operational, it's still just sitting there, looking to have this building take off. I don't see that it's furthering industrial developments. And right now, in the state, I don't see that it's really encouraging exhibits at fairs, exposition, and conventions. At some point, maybe that would be the case. So it says no appropriation may be for the express aid of any private citizen, firm, or corporation. It seems to me that it fits within the latter. We probably should not fund that.
could you, what about science zone? That's something that I feel really good about. Everybody's taking an opportunity to tour their building, but I think they would,
Yeah,
does that fall in that line?
you know, in that case, they are up and running. So you have a little bit more flexibility there because they would be then encouraging exhibits, expositions, potentially conventions. You might say that it's part of an advertising, again, backing into it by saying that because it is up and running and you have different groups coming in to see it, that you might be able to do it that way. That one's not quite as clear cut, but when it comes to construction, it's a pretty darn tough call.
It's a tough one.
Yeah.
So the event center being different because the city built it.
It's our property,
If I might, looking at 15-111, Wyoming statutes, the governing body of any city or town may make appropriation from the city or town general fund for, one, I, advertising the resources of the city, furthering its industrial development, or encouraging exhibits at fairs, expositions, and conventions. And that's also pretty broad. That's a lot more broad than what Article 16, Section 6 reads. But that is the statute, and I don't know whether a statute, you might have a constitutional issue, but they're all covered. If you're building a museum or you're building a place for performance, under 15-111, they're in there.
Mike?
I really wanted to agree with all of the things that Charlie said, and specifically with the lyric. I think they are in operation, albeit limited compared to where they would like to be. But I would argue, along with what Councilman Hopkins said, that I think we are doing a community promotion, in essence, there, conventions, meetings, all those kind of things, by, in essence, giving them a shot on the arm at what I think is a pretty crucial stage in their trying to get their program off the ground. You know, if we can, it's the old story that if you put money in at the right time, it makes a big difference. Instead of, you know, a little bit later on, it might not, you know, yeah, it's still money, but it might not be as crucial to their operation. And so, you know, while I generally certainly always say, well, listen to what your lawyer says and don't listen to what I say, because, you know, we're paying for his advice, you're not paying for my advice. But I would certainly argue that I think we could fit that into the provisions that Councilman Hopkins read there, and so I would advocate for the lyric on that.
Dallas?
You recommend we approve this? Is this a fair way to do this, in your mind?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, it depends on whether you're suggesting the averages or the actual recommendation or the 5 votes or.
I want it to be fair with you, Mr. Manager, because I want to make sure we understand each other. So you're recommending the infrastructure, recommendations and the purchase of equipment, all of those numbers you're recommending. And are you recommending the numbers that Councilman Jesse got for us? Are you recommending that too, as the secondary, issues? Is how we're doing, second tier?
So, Mr. Mayor, Councilman, there's second tier projects that you could choose from. Of the projects that we have on our plate, we recommend the first tier as your highest priority.
Yes, okay.
Now, if you do decide to stick with a $3 million figure, I'm rounding up or down. You have about $2 million, again, rounding up or down, to consider for other priorities that this group might have, whether it be projects in infrastructure, the city side, or projects on the social service side, or agencies. So you do have that latitude as well.
Okay, so, and I understand that I understand what you're recommending. Now, the issue of the blending of everyone's ideas, mine was left out. So maybe that should have been put in there. And that will change all your numbers. Now, I'm not gonna ask you to do that because I think that shows how preposterous it is to blend the numbers. But I understand from a political standpoint, that's why you did it, I'm assuming. You took everybody's numbers and said we blended them all in and that's a fair way to do it. I don't think it's a fair way to do it, but if you think it's a fair way to do it, I'm gonna go with it.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, that's a very fair question. The averages were not meant to be a recommendation. The averages were simply there as a scale for you to gauge how everybody's contributions from a voting standpoint, if you will, this is not a vote, but a voting standpoint, their input impacts the requests that have been put together. So if you're looking for a staff recommendation, very concretely, I would say go to the staff recommendation column and stick with that.
Well, that's what I wanted to know when I asked you to prepare this. So
Yeah.
if that's there, that's what I'm gonna stick with, except I would like to see something different done for CATSI and for the rescue mission. But the thing that I find is always aggravating when I hear arguments from everybody on the council, and they're all good arguments, but they won't apply any of them to the cable man. They just won't do it. And it's at times when we need to take into account our money. And I'm hoping next year that a few people start looking at that a little differently. Now, when I hear councilmen who aren't lawyers trying to give me legal advice, I don't even listen to it. Because they read it, they can interpret it however they want. When I hear another lawyer wanting to trump legal advice, I say, go sit down with Henley and really say you agree with Henley or the law or whatever, because he's a judge. He's a guy that had to do that for a living. So Mike, I just ask you to sit down with Henley, because if it's not legal, I don't think you should be doing it. I'm not questioning Henley. I know Henley for 35 years. He's an excellent lawyer, and he gives legal advice, and he doesn't throw his own personality into it. And we can accept it or not accept it. But I've had really old, famous lawyers tell me, if you don't want to accept my advice, fire me now and I can go home. Because you're wasting your money if you don't take my advice. So I don't mind other people wanting to read statutes and say things, it's fine with me. But I just don't listen to them. I listen to the legal expert, as I would if an architect came in and he's telling me something, or somebody else comes in and tells me something about the human resources issue, like Charlie. Whenever he says anything about one of these agencies, I listen to him because I know he's an expert. The police chief talks about police issues, I listen to him because I know he's an expert in it. That's what I think we should be doing at this council. And our manager's an expert, and Liz Becker's an expert, and the people he has surrounding him, Tom, they're all experts in finance. I'm gonna listen to them.
Can you?
So I'll change my vote back to the averaging method. Does that make it easier for you?
Yes.
My question is, a kind of remember an email that came through with some concerns about whether or not they were meeting their federal requirements. So I just want to make sure everybody saw that, because that makes me pretty uncomfortable to fund them at all. My question though would be the restorative justice program. At this point, they're at 107,000. Can we pull the program off for that, or what happens to that 100,000 if that's all they're going to get?
Mr. Mayor, Madam Councilwoman, the concern that I have with regard to that as a prospect for 1 cent funding, as much as I support the program and think it's doing good for people in our community, is that it kind of breaks the promise that we've made to the community. And you guys have the ability to make whatever contract or promise with the community you feel important. But what I've represented anyway is that we wouldn't use 1% money for operations in the organization. And it's hard for me to see this particular request not conflict with that type of doctrine. Now again, council can tell me otherwise, and I will embrace it as if it were my own. But that's why I didn't suggest it.
So is it gonna be funded then?
Go ahead.
Is it, if it's is it general fund thing?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, this does not indicate that funding would be taken away from what's already in place.
Okay.
And so the general fund will continue to support it. This funding, over and above what's currently being funded, is what would go without.
Carmen,
Was
gets you,
there
Mike.
any discussion of putting restorative justice in the budget for fiscal year 19, and you just decided you couldn't afford it, or is it possible that it would be added to fiscal year 20 if things improve? Because it would basically be an added budget line item for the police department, correct?
It would, that's correct. And Mr. Mayor and Councilman, that's exactly right. Given the pressures that we were feeling in the police department to try to support the SRO program in its growth, and the, at the time, burgeoning relationship with the school district, we didn't think we could reasonably come forward with a funding proposal that would increase restorative justice when we had so many increasing pressures on trying to fund the SRO program. So it's my hope that we could bring forward a proposal for fiscal year 20 that would please the council.
And the answer to Kaneen's question is what, that 107 does anything, or that would be better to just wait?
My recommendation would be to wait, but the 107 certainly could help.
What would we do with it?
We would hire people or a person.
We'd have one staff position, basically, with
Additional.
salary and benefits, I assume. Maybe a little bit of support. So it's enough you could put, it'd be like a placeholder to get the program at least started and out of the victim services.
Probably to add a person.
Okay.
Mike and then Chris.
The concerns about the taking the 1 cent money and using it to pay for salaries and that's exactly why I zeroed the restorative justice in my recommendation. Because, and like Councilman Powell talked about, that he tried to look at things that were more capital improvement, more permanent infrastructure, you know, buildings, that kind of things. That's kind of what I tried to do too. I want to address the idea of the taking an average, and I'm not as scared of that as Councilman Laird is, because with several of the items that I had zeroed in my recommendation, I was looking at those and I really kind of wanted to hear what everybody else thought about some of them. Taking an average is a way of kind of tempering that and taking into account what everybody else thought about those things. And so I'm not as frightened about taking that average, because there are a lot of these things that I could have gone up or down a little bit on. And so I'm not that scared about, if there was something in here that we were taking an average that just really did violence to my thinking, then I'd be jumping up and down about it. And frankly, the restorative justice does do a little bit of violence to my thinking, because it did seem like it was just all for salaries, not for that. And so I
You
guess
didn't
I
like
would
that
weigh
from
in
day
on it.
one.
Well, no, now, I'm very skeptical of the restorative justice concept. However, the bigger picture thing that I see there is that I think that the city does need to get into the business of having if we're gonna run a court and handle criminal matters, I think we need to have some kind of a probation department. And I see that as, in essence, a sort of a side door to getting, getting some municipal probation officers. And that, to me, is the bigger picture, more desirable thing there than arguing about the details of whether if you're calling it a restorative justice model or what you're calling it. And so, no, but my zero on that did not come from my disfavor of the restorative justice concept. It came from the fact that that was just to fund positions instead of capital things.
Get the probation department started next year, because we do need one.
Yeah,
Agree.
yeah.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I agree on the restorative justice thing. It's all salaries. Now, something that struck me as really odd when we had the presentation on this is I heard 501, I heard current CPD employees would be funded as salaries on this. It sounds to me like a separate 501 that's not going to be operating as CPD that appears to be a city staff. Because and tell me if I'm mistaken when I heard it, it's we need this money and my position will be filled because it's already funded. So there are a lot of things there that I didn't sit real comfortable with.
So,
And if I'm wrong, I need to know.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, that's exactly what made me nervous as well.
Okay.
If it were funded through a 501c3, it would still be hard for us to not be the manager of that particular employee and therefore have that operational impact.
That's what I felt.
Yeah.
so I think there's enough support for averages, if I'm not with Canine, being able to go with that. And I think we probably need to wait, because I know Dallas is going with the recommendation of the staff recommendation line, and then Canine, so we're gonna have to get those averaged in for us to be able to do that. So how should we move forward, I guess?
I would suggest that, and I think we did this last time, we only have so much time.
Right.
I guess anyone that, based on what they've heard,
Oh, yeah.
wants to change their column, we could do that and then recompute. I think that's what I don't know if it made sense, but I think that's what we did last time.
Yeah.
Just
I think
hear
it
what
was.
everybody said and
Yep.
say, does this change your mind about this?
And you can go back.
Do that. Because if you really want to do that, then I want my column that I sent in to reflect, I'm giving them each every penny they requested.
Well, we have a
That's where
cap,
we're headed.
we were given a cap here.
Well, we're not bound by that cap, Charlie.
There's only so much money.
Well, I understand that. But that's what I'm telling you, why I think it's the whole thing's ridiculous. Because we're not bound by any number that Carter gave us, other than that I believe he's a good city manager, he has a good staff, and I'm willing to take his recommendations. But if you wanna jump into this other deal, then I want my numbers, if you're gonna reopen it, and you said it, I wasn't gonna say it, but if you wanna reopen it, then I want my numbers going in for the average, and you can see how they come out. And with that, I'm gonna get a drink of water.
If we reopen it, we don't get to the 1st of October meeting, was it the 1st of October or just the first meeting in
First
October?
meeting, right.
We don't get all
I
this
think-
done. We start, all we do is start countering each other.
I mean, right now.
If anybody wants to switch
Yeah.
anything now, is that what you're saying, Charlie?
With what all's been said about the restorative justice, does anybody want to go to zero on that?
I do.
Look at it in 10 years.
I wouldn't change mine to zero.
But I already did zero, so I'm over there.
Let me offer this.
Okay, hold on one second. Go ahead, Chris.
If we, I guess you could just go around the table and say, does anybody want to change anything on that? Just to expedite it, and then we
I
get
agree.
Canine's information. independently, please don't tell us now, because that will affect decisions potentially.
Well, but he should get it. You know what mine is. So if they're gonna do it with hers, I want mine in there. And I
Dallas,
think it's
I
ridiculous.
feel like we should have gotten both of yours to be able to make a decision on it tonight, but we didn't. And because of
Well,
circumstances
you
or
did get mine.
decisions.
You did get mine, they just didn't put it in.
Well,
I sent it in the first
It's
one.
not written down, it doesn't exist.
Well, I sent him an email, it was written down.
Well,
Asked Fleur, she got it.
The element that I'm confused about, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, is whether or not you're wanting to stick to the 5-vote doctrine. Is that
I
off the
think that
table?
one-
That's off the table.
That's off the table,
Yeah,
okay.
so it's just,
all
we're okay with everybody, okay
Okay.
with the average part of it. What we're trying to deal with now is looking at wanting to, Charlie has wanting to put it back on the table that if you have something you wanna change, and it sounds like Dallas is not okay with that. Dallas, am I correct in saying that?
No, I'm just. There's a scientific accounting approach to this matter, this money. I would say most people, including me, are generally not used to handling $60 million of other people's money and asking for the citizens to approve votes. So truly, the only experts in the room are sitting right by you, Mr. Mayor. One of them's the manager and one of them is the CFO. And if they're saying they've worked at other cities, they've seen this happen. We have a couple city council members who've gone through this before, which what I look to them for mostly is what do the public think of these kind of things? Do the public want us to buy a building for somebody? Does the public want us to do these kind of things? I don't think they do, truthfully, but I think they want us to help our citizens, all fairly, help all citizens fairly. I think that's the way the law resides. So I'm good when I have a city attorney of Mr. Henley's caliber telling me the legality of these things. I'm good with the city manager. My bleeding heart wants to help people, and I would give them all the money they need. And I know that's probably not practical. But that was my first vote, Councilman Walsh. I sent that in and said I put down for me the amount they've all requested, and I did that probably before anybody else voted. And, but here again, if you wanna talk about that, has everybody put in their deal on the city manager by now? Because I know I was the first one to do that too, and I was the only one for 2 weeks after the deadline went by. So I don't need to be lectured about whether things are on time, cause my things are on time. Now, but I don't think, Charlie, I would wanna reopen this. I think that you have the information in the manager's hands and the CFO's hands, and I think Councilman Walsh wants to tweak some things. I think that's fine.
I have no changes, I don't want to tweak anything.
So then I'm good. So we don't have to get into all this, because I think it's ridiculous to
Hold
do.
on a second, Charlie.
I don't think it's ridiculous. I think, here's my suggestion, and we could even do this with a thumbs up, thumbs down. Carter and his staff gave us $3 million of recommendations. We were all asked then to make our own, put our own numbers in these columns, or in these rows. We did that. I would suggest, Mr. Mayor, that you ask if anyone does want to change their allocation now, and make sure that that number does not exceed $3 million, which is what the city staff proposed. If anyone wants to have more than $3 million allocated, then they're gonna have to go back into the general 1 cent allocation and decide if that's gonna come from police or from roads, or where's that money gonna come from. And otherwise, we keep our totals under that $3 million, and if there is money, if the average comes out lower than that, then we could look at some of these second-tier projects and at least begin a fund for some of the more critical ones that we could add to if there is unallocated at the end of the year. But that's my proposal, that we use the $3 million as a cap and come up with our own, and anybody wants to make a change now, they can. If Chris, you don't want to, that's fine. Anybody, if we all wanna just stand pat with what we've got, that's fine.
So let me ask everybody,
And then go with the averages.
is there anybody in here that wants to change anything? I know Chris had said his only thing was restorative justice.
Me.
No, mine's.
Or,
I-
I'm not Chris, I'm sorry, Sean. Sean said restorative justice was to take that back to 0.
Can I ask one more question about that? I'm sorry to interrupt, but Carter, could we put some money into restorative justice and instead of putting it into a 501(c), just add it to our police department budget and say this is money that Chief McFeeters can use to begin that program under his supervision?
Mr. Mayor, we can, Councilman. The difficulty will come as to how you feel about using 1 cent funds for city salaries. And so as long as you're comfortable with that, then absolutely, we can.
Okay, I'll change mine to 0 too.
Yeah.
So Charlie. The 3 million, we were told, is something they recommend. It's something that we as a city council don't have to accept. For purposes of what he's recommending, I will accept the 3 million. But if you wanna go around tweaking all this stuff again, then I want my numbers put in here. And I think rightfully I should have them in there if that's what you're gonna open up. I am happy with what the manager's done. I think we should follow the law, and they know what they're doing. And when we start tweaking these little things, it puts other things out of balance. What I'm hoping really is we get an extra 10 million and the city passes this thing. But I think that when this hits the paper and the city public sees this, then maybe we'll get more information and wanna change it again.
So Dallas, in that
Point of
vein,
order, Mr.
yeah,
Mayor.
go ahead.
I made a proposal and requested a thumbs up, thumbs down.
So Charlie is asking to keep it at a maxed out, leveled out $3 million if we do any changes. Is there support?
And Mr. Mayor, if we take the restorative justice and take that down to 0, that would take out 107,000.
Brings us
So
to
that,
3.16.
yeah, so that would make it 3.16.
Just move that
Okay.
over the rescue mission.
Yeah, but so we'd be in the ballpark.
I would like to amend my request and say that it must come under 3.16.
Is there support for that?
Does anybody want, so that this still give people a chance to change something if they wanted to, my suggestion.
I'm good with that. Let's.
If I may, Charlie, I mentioned before that I did come in above the $3 million.
Oh, that's right.
Now, the reason I did that is I looked back on the first sheet that we handed out before we asked for recommendation from staff. I took the 6 million from community projects, I added in the 1.5 million for river restoration, the Fort Casper, Nick, and museums, and the subsidized bus race to the tune of 1.4. That came up well over 6 million. It actually came up 8.94 million. So when I did this, and granted my numbers come in over 5, but I'm more than happy to take the average at the 3.2, whatever that came out, which is where we stand now, 3.268. So I'll leave my numbers the same, but I'm more than happy to 3.268.
Okay. So are we not gonna, does anybody wanna make any adjustments? I'm a little confused is where we're at, 'cause
I'm gonna stand pat, just like Chris.
Other than the restorative justice,
Same here.
and-
I'll stand pat.
And take restorative justice out.
I would like to put 100,000 into Central Wyoming Rescue Mission.
The who?
Central Wyoming Rescue Mission.
I'm for that.
That's my only change.
Do you know why the application was late?
Why do we care?
I
at this
believe,
point?
it's my understanding,
Deadline.
I believe my understanding was it was misinterpretation of what time the deadline time was. I think it was at 3 o'clock, and I think they thought it was 5 o'clock is when it was, and I got here at 5. So it was 2 hours late? Or how, what? 3 hours late.
They were over taking care of people that needed to be taken care of, and they got it over here timely, and
So,
I'm not.
Mr. Mayor, are you saying that instead of using the average of 78,000, you want to make that a total of 100,000, or do you
No,
want to make that
no, I want
178,000?
to, I want to put in, for me, my recommendation would be, for my vote would be 100,000 to fund them for 100,000, is what I'm saying. Does that make sense?
Are we changing, recalculating?
Yeah, well,
Just,
because-
if we are, all we gotta do is make sure that someone is documenting all that.
Yeah, Fleur's doing it right now.
That would boost their average up to 92,828.
Okay. No pressure.
And then we had your numbers, which are the city manager's numbers. Or, am I understanding you?
Charlie, I'm happy with what the city manager did. It's a complicated process, but the tweaking and then Bob spending more than the 3 million, that's why I did it the way I did it. I said it to her, because I felt there may be an average coming up and it wasn't gonna work.
But Dallas, you wanted the caveat in your recommendation, from the staff recommendation, to fund Central Wyoming Rescue, or the
Yes.
Wyoming Rescue
Yes, I
Mission.
do.
Okay, so
Yes, I
that's,
do.
Fleur, you
I
have
could give
that.
them everything they requested actually, but I'll give them whatever we've got here to give them.
He wants to go with the staff recommendation, but he wants to fund, the Wyoming Rescue Mission.
With the money
You're
that's,
full.
the thing that you said, with the money that's coming from the restorative justice, give it to the mission.
Do you want the full, which is 200,000, or do you want?
I want whatever the council will vote to give them,
Okay.
because they need the money.
Mr. Mayor, it probably would be helpful if we are gonna tweak, instead of saying, hey, let's put it in there and then see what the new average is, I would recommend just saying, the mission should get 100,000. Yes, 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 no, 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 and go around the table and see what you get.
Okay.
That way, the number is more clear to the
An
mission.
additional 100,000.
Or whatever the vote is. I just think instead of just plugging in one cell of your spreadsheet here, can we just decide on a number, and then the mission will know definitively what that number would be.
What's wrong with taking the money that you're taking from restorative justice and giving it to the mission and it still balances? Tom didn't even fall out of his chair when I said that.
107, 153.
It depends on
Yeah, no,
what you mean by
they-
it balances.
They didn't balance, but,
We just move that number.
I just give 'em a
You
number.
put them at 0 and you move that number and add it on to the missions. That's what I was thinking when you said.
So then that would be $178,542.
Exactly.
Right.
well, Mr. Mayor, at the risk of butting in, who all thinks that the mission should get 100,000?
Total
think that's
or
where
the
we're at.
additional
Total,
100,000?
no, 100,000 total. And I'm asking, I'm not, because I'm trying to help clarify.
Well, what are you gonna do to balance the money that you're taking off restorative justice if you say it that way?
Subtract it.
That's what I'm gonna
I
do.
wouldn't balance it. I
Well, we
would
don't
put
have
it
to
towards
balance
tier
it,
two.
don't have to
Dallas.
balance.
You're the one that said that we can.
Okay,
start-
point of order.
you know.
We're way off here,
Yeah.
and I want to get us back online here because this is, we need to be able to fund and do this. Okay, so we're sitting here doing that, so I'm going to go around the room. I'm going to ask what you believe they should be funded, and that's what we're going to do. Okay, Chris,
I stand by what I,
153. Mike,
For the rescue mission?
yeah,
100.
100.
no, you looked down the wrong line. Mine was 46, and basically that was wave city fees.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was looking at Jesse's. I apologize. 46. I apologize. Mike, you said what? 100,000.
100,000.
Okay. Bob,
rescue mission, I'll go for 100.
100,
Sticking with mine, 200.
200. Okay. Kenny?
200.
Kenny said 200.
Well, I want mine that I gave to Fleur to be in there, if you're gonna average it, which is the full amount they requested.
200,000. Okay. Dallas is 200,000. Charlie?
I'm gonna leave
What
mine at
you're
50,
arguing
and
about.
just by way of explanation, I love what the mission does, but we gave them a very substantial contribution 4 years ago to the building of that facility. And I feel like that was a very significant contribution, and $50,000 in addition to that is enough.
So 50,000. Okay. And I'll say with 100,000. Fleur, do you have that all down? Okay. Thank you.
110,666.
What is it? What is it, math man?
110,666.
Pretty close to the average.
0.66.
Rain man?
Pretty close to the average.
Is that what you got? I guess 0.67.
Mr. Mayor.
See how easy that was, Dallas?
No, it's absurd.
Oh,
What
I'm
we
changing
just
my vote,
did
Dallas.
was absurd, and how it came out was absurd, and it's just guessing, and to say something that, Charlie, what you did 4 years ago has nothing to do with what you're doing.
It's my vote,
now.
Dallas.
I know.
I have 1/9 of the
I
decision
know
just as you do.
But I'm just saying, it's not, how do you rationalize it?
I just told you.
Well, I accept how you rationalize it, I just don't get why you're doing it that way.
okay, agenda review, so we can have a little recess before we get started at 6 o'clock. Carter?
I don't really have anything to add.
All right.
So.
Let's take a 20-minute